Welcome to the London Free Press Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Gilbert, a former London Anglican priest who is currently serving a 13-year jail sentence for sexually abusing 5 London area boys in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, is now also convicted of abusing 2 more boys from Whitehorse when he worked there. David Norton is facing more years in prison now, and at 77 years old, the judge has to consider his advanced age, health issues, and the seriousness of the abuses when issuing his sentence. So today I'm talking with London Free Press crime reporter James Sims about the latest trial and this sentencing. And Jane has covered the whole thing from start to finish. Hi, Jane. How are you?
I'm fine, Rachel. How are you doing?
Good, good. So you covered the first trial, which was here in London. This second trial is actually in Whitehorse, and we'll get to how you covered that in a little bit. But give us a little background on David Norton. Who is he? He was a fairly prominent figure here in London.
Absolutely. He was an award-winning history instructor at King's University College. He was specialized in Indigenous studies, and he was beloved. He was a beloved priest in the Huron diocese and in the Anglican Church. I don't think the people who had dealings with him that didn't involve this part of his life, I think were very fond of him. And I will say too that the boys in these cases loved him because he gave them a life that they never expected. I will say this has been quite a journey through the court system. And I think it's been quite a journey for the people who knew Norton because his fall from grace has been so profound. Just a little bit of background. He was first charged in 2015 after one of the boys, now a young man from St. Andrew's Parish out at Chippewa, he made repeated attempts to tell the police that this had happened to him, that when he was a little boy, he was befriended by Norton. Norton made him an altar boy. He was from a very troubled home, and then he would take him into his apartment, and then things would happen. Police investigated, and it's one of those cases, as we find in historic sexual assault cases. I mean, it takes a long time for people to come forward, to feel safe, and to come forward. And part of it is that there's difficulty in for them to be believed. That's how they feel. There's a lot of shame attached to these cases.
Yes.
But eventually, four Indigenous men came forward from Chippewa. But as those charges were laid, there was a young man here in London, at a London church, who came forward, who non-Indigenous boy, who was assaulted during the 1990s. So the Chippewa cases happened in the late 70s, early 80s. The St. Mark's case happened in the 1990s.
Right.
Mr. Norton pleaded guilty in the St. Mark's case, in the London case, and was given a 4-year sentence, which was a pretty, very hefty sentence on a guilty plea. Then what happened is he did not plead guilty in the Chippewa case, and that was a full-blown trial, and it was an extraordinary trial. These men were you just don't forget them. They were extraordinary witnesses who told their story and be able to articulate the complicated relationship they had with Norton. In the end, he was found guilty, and there was what we call a joint submission from the Crown and the defense on sentencing, which means that they come forward with a sort of a sentencing. It's not a plea deal, but a sentencing deal that Norton agreed to, which was 9 years for the assaults on 4 boys. Mm-hmm. As these trials were working their way through the court, Mr. Norton apparently, as we found out last week, tried to contact a young man up in the Yukon for a letter of reference. Between the time Norton was at Chippewa and when he was back in London permanently, he went to the Yukon and got a job at the Diocese of Yukon to be the Indigenous Ministries. They called it the Indian Ministries Coordinator, and he had 2 charges up there. When that happened, when the reference letter was being requested, this man went on the internet. He found the newspaper stories about Mr. Norton. He contacted the reporter, asking, who do I contact? And that set the wheels in motion for him to contact someone at the London police, who contacted the RCMP, and these two brothers went into the RCMP eventually and told their story. And that's where these charges come from. So it's a bit of a convoluted history. But
Yeah.
what's extraordinary about it, Rachel, is how similar each one of these men's story was. It was just
Wow.
like a repeat. It was like pressing repeat on a tape recorder. Um, they were all from homes that were uh, either it was a single family, single parent home, or there was some sort of, there was a lot of poverty, there was a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
And he came in as their knight in shining armor and gave them everything that they could never have. And then it would escalate. He would have them on sleepovers. He took them on trips. He took them here, there, and everywhere. And then he left, and these boys felt completely abandoned.
Wow. Yeah, you did talk a little. I was going to ask you to kind of expand on the grooming process that you talked about in your story, the judges talked about in the trial. Because he took them away. The parents really trusted him. They obviously didn't think anything was wrong. But you mentioned that the boys really loved him as well, even though he was doing this. What did the boys say in the trial?
There was this extraordinary moment last week, I have to tell you, when the younger brother was testifying, and he said something that just summed up all these cases completely. It was that we love the guy. He gave us things that we never even dreamed we could have. But we knew that there was sacrifice that had to come with that. And that sacrifice came at night. And I went, well, that's the rationalization. They put up with it because they knew that there was something else. Now, I will say this, there was a troubling aspect to the Chippewa case that did not show up in the Yukon case, which was the boys who testified said that they believed that they were drugged before they went to bed, that there was something put in their pop shop before they went to bed that made them sleepier.
Interesting.
That is just their own interpretation of it. I mean, there was no physical evidence because it was from so long ago, but all four of them talked about being sleepy, being after they'd be given a treat at night and they'd be sleepy, and then they'd be assaulted during the night. So that was not what the experience was of the Yukon boys. None of that came up in the testimony.
Right.
But the grooming part, bang on all the way through.
And the progression of things,
Yes. Make them altar boys. Ingratiate yourself with the families. Make yourself you are the representative of God, and so we do what you want us to do. Make a church life that is really extraordinary for the entire community, and make a life for these boys that's beyond anything that they ever imagined.
Absolutely.
And then have them for sleepovers.
Where was he taking them for sleepovers?
Well, most of the assaults happen in the Yukon, in the rectory, which is the priest's home, in his apartment. But he also had a piece of property just outside of Belmont here, that he would bring the boys to, dirt biking, and they go to the beach, and they go to Toronto, and and the second brother who testified particularly said, yes, those assaults happened there too. And in London, he had an apartment in London when he was at Chippewa. They would happen there, but they also went out to the Belmont property, and camping and canoeing, and just, it was kind of, any way to sort of.
Whenever they were alone with him.
Yeah. There was a possibility it was going to happen. Yeah.
Has Norton offered any defense of this? Like, what has he said? He pleaded guilty in the London case, but he did not plead guilty with the 4 boys from Chippewa. Did he offer any defense with the 2 boys from Whitehorse?
Well, this was really weird. This is why this trial, this was bizarre to me. He entered not guilty pleas to 6 charges. And I'll just explain the 6 charges quickly. There were 2 sexual assault charges for each boy and a sexual interference. The reason there were 2 sexual assault charges is because the criminal code switched in the middle of the time frame when these boys were abused. So they covered both charges. However, he pleaded not guilty, so these boys were compelled to testify at his trial. However, The instructions to the defense, once they testified, was don't cross-examine them. And when it came time for Mr. Norton to offer a defense, he didn't offer one.
Really?
So there is some, what's the word I want? He will get some credit for pleading guilty. But it's rather strange, and the judge has commented on this in the Yukon. Like it may be an expression on him of remorse and acceptance of the fact that there was no cross-examination of these boys and no defense offer.
Sure, because it's interesting. He pled not guilty, but then doesn't even offer a defense. So
right. He did offer a defense in the London trial, but he kind of got mixed up on it. He said, "I would never touch a boy. I would never do that to these boys." And meanwhile, he'd already pled guilty to doing it to someone in the 1990s. And it was a case that wasn't even allowed into the Chippewa case until he uttered those words. So, he offered no defense at this time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So he's currently in jail now. Where is he, and what is jail life like for him?
Well, I have to tell you that one of the interesting things out of the pandemic in the criminal justice system is that it's made it routine to be able to go to court while you're somewhere else. That's how I was able to cover the Yukon case, by being able to getting permission from the court to be able to cover it. Sure. For Mr. Norton, the reason I rose that link is because Mr. Norton is 77 years old. He's not of great health, and he is in a prison in the Kingston area is all they would say. Okay. He appeared on screen during the trial in a little viewing room to watch the trial. He hasn't said much. I'm kind of wondering if he's going to say something once we get to the end of the sentencing process. But he has a variety: kidney disease, some heart trouble, a lot of issues that come along with someone with a man who's 77 years old.
Sure.
So that's why he was too ill really to travel. So they made sure that the trial could be done remotely. And I must say that my experience with the teleconferencing system in the Yukon was very, very good. They have an extraordinarily good connection. Let's just say that. Okay. That's very
great
good
equipment and a good video conferencing system.
Absolutely, probably out of necessity, being a more remote place. But I think some Ontario courts could take some lessons from what the Yukon is doing.
Take note if this is going to be more the norm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do criminals of advanced age get accommodations for their sentencing? Because we are still waiting to see what his sentence will be. Will he get accommodation for being 77 and of ill health?
He could. And you've kind of seen that before, that there's, this is a really interesting sentencing process. And I think that the prosecutor of the case has made a really fair and on point in this. I mean, sexual assault is sexual assault, and punishment is warranted. And this is a man it's an extreme breach of trust, extraordinarily bad breach of trust. He's asking for another 10 years. There's something called concurrent time that you will see in court when you serve one sentence at the same time as another. I have an inkling maybe that might be what the defense asked for, but it is a separate set of charges and convictions that should be served separately. But I've seen in the past when older offenders will get a little bit of a break because they're old and usually they're of ill health. I'm curious to see, given Mr. Norton's behavior during this trial, and there seems to be an olive branch that has been offered to these boys, if that's going to help them out. One of the things that happened during this case is at the end of the testimony on the second day, they requested to meet with him privately.
Really?
Through the link, and which happened. It was private. None of us saw it, but it was these men made it clear that they don't hate him. They loved him.
Wow.
But they need to get rid of this. Yes. They've carried this around for 40 years, and they needed to say this, and they needed to hold him accountable for what happened to them.
What a complex
So,
relationship.
oh, extraordinary. Yeah,
You mentioned in
absolutely.
your story also, sorry, that the judge says that he didn't see any evidence of any premeditation to lure these boys. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's tricky.
Okay.
It's tricky
Yeah.
in legal terms. Prosecution saying he groomed them, and the defense saying no, it's not grooming. He loved these guys, and it wasn't that his. The defense is going to argue is that Norton's motivation for befriending these children and their families was not for a sexual purpose.
Mm.
Given his record, I find that kind of that's going to be a bit of a, I would think, a bit of a heavy lift, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But like given on the evidence of the trial itself, um, and the judge said quite, frankly, I adjudicate an awful lot of sexual assault cases in the Northwest Territories or in the Yukon. My apologies.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see the pattern. That's going to be. I was thinking by the end of the submissions by the prosecutor that maybe he had swayed the judge a little bit on that. So we'll see what he says. We'll see what it looks like to him.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the prosecutor is arguing for an additional 10 years. And what is the next step? When do we expect the sentencing to be handed out?
Well, tomorrow, Mr. Norton will be back in what they in a set date court. I think they call it up there. It's kind of like the Superior Court Assignment Court here in Ontario, setting a date for the next part of the sentencing. There was just not enough time the other day for the defense to offer up its submissions.
Mm.
I suspect after that there'll be some time after that for the judge to just decide what he wants to do, and there'll be another date where he will render his decision on this case.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll watch your reporting on this story for sure, because we know you can cover this very easily in the Yukon from here. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. We always enjoy your insight. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.